There's this famous result that Anthropic found, which is that their models, when they were faced with the threat of being shut down and had no other options, would blackmail the executive responsible for shutting them down using evidence that it had figured out that the guy was having an affair and threatening to like tell the board, tell his wife if they move forward with the shutdown. At their core, these are prediction machines, and people will sometimes use that to dismiss them. But it also has like kind of interesting and scary implications, which is like, you know, they will take on personas very easily.
I have sometimes been accused of drinking the AI Kool-Aid, and maybe that's right. Certainly you can judge for yourself, and feel free to tell me in the comments below. But there's this distinction that my guest this week makes that I found incredibly useful, so I want to tell you about it as well. The idea is there are basically 3 schools of thought around AI. First up, we've got the boosters, people who want AI to go as fast as possible because they think it'll be good, or for some intrinsic love of speed. Then, on the other hand, you've got the critics, people who think that AI is running on hot air, that it will shortly hit a wall for technical reasons, or because of the economics not working out, or that sometimes even that talking about artificial intelligence is to already have sort of fallen into a kind of marketing hype. But there's also a third group, one that Garrison Lovely, my guest this week, calls the worriers. And I am in that group. I look at the graphs of how powerful these models are getting, and I don't see us hitting a wall. I don't see the money running out, or even progress slowing down. So I'm not a critic in this sense. But I'm not a booster either. I'm not happy about what I think automation will almost certainly bring, which is the almost total disempowerment of the global working class. And I've had this anxiety for years, but it's always remained slightly nebulous until I read the book that we are discussing this week. Garrison Lovely is the author of Obsolete, the AI industry's $1 trillion race to replace you and how to stop it. The book goes systematically through the arguments of the boosters and the critics alike. The book goes systematically through the arguments of the boosters and the critics alike, and argues that AI will be transformative, that transformation will be largely quite bad, and that we do have the power to stop it. Garrison used to work for McKinsey, the global management consultancy company, but he left and became a whistleblower, writing about what he had seen there and writing about McKinsey as capital's willing executioners. Moniker we might one day be applying to AI itself. This episode links back to episodes we did with Luke Kemp on existential risk from AI, back to the conversation with Quinn Slobodian and Ben Tarnoff about Elon Musk's empire. It links back to the Lisa Siriganian episode we did about personhood and AI. And if you want to explore those connections for yourself, you can find the full Do Your Own Research map on the Novara Media website. Just go to the homepage and find a little box that says Do Your Own Research. Click on that, and that will take you to the map. Garrison Lovely, welcome to Do Your Own Research.
Thank you so much for having me, Richard.
I have basically no technical skill. Just going to put that out up front. I understand some things about how these systems work, but basically no technical skill. And this weekend, this is a true story, I vibe coded using Claude Code a completely new version of chess, which isn't turn-based. It's like you get kind of movement tokens, and you can kind of move your pieces as and when you want, but it's kind of a resource management game because you've got to maintain some movement tokens so you can move if your opponent attacks you. That took 3 prompts in Claude Code. And I kind of wonder, like, how do we assess where the state of the art in AI is? Because my assumption is that lots of people watching this will have, at some point, let's say 2024, 2025, more or less turned off from the AI story and have decided that it wasn't for them, that it didn't really kind of work, that there were major problems with the technology. Maybe there are, but probably has sort of taken their eye off the ball. How do you explain where we are right now with LLMs?
Yeah. I mean, it's tricky. I think, so the industry uses benchmarks to explain progress. There are a number of problems with these benchmarks. There's lots of critiques of the benchmarks, but they show exponential progress in like the length of tasks that AIs can do. And it's hard to like internalize what that means, but essentially every 6 months, 7 months at first, the length would double. So you'd go from like AI could handle a task that a human could do 30 minutes, like 50% of the time. 4 months, 5 months, 6 months later, doubles to 60 minutes, doubles to 2 hours. And what that means is every 3 to 6 months, the absolute length of time of the tasks that the AI could do increased by more than the entire preceding like 5 years. And this has accelerated, compressed in the last few months. And people like look at these charts and will be like, nah, that can't be true because it just feels wrong. But I think the only way to really get a sense for this is to use the tools and use the frontier models and like really push them. And a lot of people just have checked out of using them for, they don't want to use it for environmental reasons, or they don't want to support the companies, or they just dislike the experience of it. And I'm sympathetic to all of that. But I think there's this kind of tricky thing where people will like proactively not use them, but then also not dig into the kind of empirical study of the models and then make very strong claims about what they cannot do. And this creates a really warped like epistemic environment. And yeah, I think you'll also see people say like, oh, I just use them every time there's a new model. I'll try them out for a few hours, like kind of like lefty journalist types who cover AI. And they'll say like, oh, I get a feel for using them and I can, write about them that way. And I use these tools every day for research, fact checking, not for writing, but like just if you can't find a use for them, you're not trying very hard. And I'm learning things about how they work just at an experiential level every day. The limitations, like exactly where the kind of line is of the jagged frontier is what people call it. And so this idea that you can just like dip in to this like extremely new, very fast moving thing every, month or two and like fully grok everything that's relevant about the capabilities of these models just is kind of wild to me. And so, yeah. And then my last argument for like why people on the left and in general should be open to using these things is that, if you care about the mission that you're working on, you should use the tools that are best for that mission. And at this point, it's becoming like avoiding using a smartphone. It's just, you can do that, but it will just create a lot of problems for you in your life, even if you're objecting to Apple or the mineral extraction or the labor exploitation of the supply chain. All very reasonable things, but we are all participating in this system, whether we like it or not, and we can change it more than the harm that we're contributing by being like the marginal customer of these things.
So refusal is no option, or refusal is not the strategy that you would recommend people engage with. But it's not complete acquiescence either.
Yeah.
We will get into exactly what you think we should do a bit later. So stick around for that. That's a bit of engagement bait for you there. Not that I try and do that very often. You used the term, or I used a bunch of terms there, that I think mark you out as someone who is currently in San Francisco.
That's true.
You use the term
I'm busted.
epistemic environment.
Oh, no.
Jagged frontier.
Yeah.
Grok as a verb.
Yeah.
Rather than as a noun for the AI system. Let's talk about some of what those things are, because I think actually they're all really, really, really useful terms. Let's start with jagged frontier, or sort of jagged intelligence. What is a jagged intelligence, and why might it explain some of the kind of dislocating, or why might it explain some of the disappointment and rejection that people feel when they use an AI and it doesn't work? And then that being contrasted with these other claims over here, which are that it's going incredibly well. You can code, as I just told you, like a full app in sort of an afternoon, like with no coding experience. How does that help us explain that idea of jagged frontier? Yeah,
I think it's this idea that the models are superhuman in some capabilities and then far below even just like the typical person in others. Things that we find easy, AI might struggle with a lot. This has been kind of like a paradox within artificial intelligence for a long time, that, stuff like math and chess, you can make computers do quite well, and we find that very hard. But then things like identifying everyday objects was something that took a lot longer to tackle for machines. And yeah, I mean, they're obviously superhumanly fast at processing information. You can feed it an entire draft of a book and it can give you feedback. And like, not all of it will be good, but it will catch things that you missed and do that in 3 minutes. Like, that's a pretty wild thing to exist. It can write superhumanly fast. It can generate code. It can write whole websites that would take maybe weeks of work in minutes. So in that sense, it's obviously superhuman in some things. And then it will give you advice that is like, are you kidding me? That's a crazy thing to say. Mm-hmm. And it will make mistakes that no human will make. For instance, it will try and fix some bug in your vibe coded project, fix the bug, and then introduce a different bug in a different place, fix that new bug and reintroduce the first bug. And like a human programmer would just not touch the first thing once it's fixed, and they would just fix it. And so, yeah, it's like this really weird new thing that has this jagged, frontier capabilities that is really hard for us to wrap our heads around, because if a human could score as well as AIs did on all these tests and work as fast as they did and in all these different domains, we would be like, oh my God, this is some like polymathic genius who will command enormous salaries and, would be producing Nobel-worthy discoveries. And so like, what gives? What's the discrepancy? And I think we just have to model these as completely new things under the sun that have their own properties, and they're not human-like intelligences. They work vaguely in the way our brains work, but like when you start analogizing to us, it just breaks down. And I think that inhumanity of it is both the source of its strength in terms of its capabilities, and then also a lot of the things that make it, particularly scary if those capabilities keep advancing.
I want to kind of point to an image that is on your screen right now. If you're watching the video, if you're listening to the podcast version, then sorry. Imagine some sort of terrifying beast, right, with many eyes, many teeth, and so on, holding a slightly obscure-looking pink head, and then imagine that pink head with a tongue coming out, holding a little kind of yellow smiling face, like an emoji, basically. And the idea of this image is to demonstrate the kind of ways in which you interact with an AI, right? The kinds of things you are talking to appears to be this smiling face, this friendly thing at the front, but is in fact somewhat more closely aligned with the pink head, which is like a strange and alien, and then actually is really exemplified by the gigantic, many tentacled, many-eyed beast, which is something you call a shoggoth. Right? It's a figure from H.P. Lovecraft, right? Which obviously should ring people's alarm bells in many different ways, but this is the metaphor people come up with. I also have a metaphor that I use sometimes, which is perhaps a bit more British, which is the fatberg.
I've not heard this. No,
the fatberg was a people had poured cooking oil and wet wipes and other kinds of things down their toilets, right, or down into their sinks. And so in the sewer system of London, we accumulated all this gunk, all this kind of fat and feces and toilet paper and all this kind of like horrible thing made essentially mostly of fat and things that couldn't really be digested by the sewer. And then it's this vast, like, awful thing of, I think, 100 meters long or so. I can't remember exactly what it was. Anyway, that's the kind of the image that I have of AI. And when you are interacting with Claude and it's being very friendly to you, or ChatGPT, and it's giving you a kind of, McKinsey light, so we say, kind of response, that is the thing that you are interacting with. You're taking a little scoop out of the fatberg and sort of sampling it in some way. All this is to say, the kind of the natural way in which we understand what it is that an AI is really confounded by the kind of the reality of that. And you've written the book Obsolete, which is trying to speak to people who are skeptical of the AI story, many of whom will be watching this video. Who are you trying to talk to? What are you trying to convince them of?
Yeah. I'm trying to talk to people who are curious about AI, but basically don't know where to start, and they don't trust anybody involved in the space, which, fair enough. I think that the stories of AI becoming extremely capable and potentially taking over the world or disempowering people are most often advanced by people like Elon Musk or Sam Altman, at least historically. And then those people are building the thing and have shown themselves to be untrustworthy and many times over. And so people dismiss these stories. And I try to just basically take people from like, no context to explaining like what the industry is trying to do, why they're trying to do it, the various arguments that are made on all sides of this, like answering common questions like what is AI? Is it a bubble? Will it take our jobs? Can't we just unplug it? Why are people building it? Et cetera. And then build up a new way of understanding the technology. So for people who like work in the space, who are coming from AI safety world, the book is actually also for them. They might skip a few chapters, but I ended up writing a thing that was like different from the kind of classic AI safety perspective, and spend a lot of the book critiquing that perspective, and ultimately propose a new framework for understanding like what we should be trying to build, and what we should be trying to stop. And I think that we shouldn't let the sources of these arguments blind us to the potential strength of them. And so I think that the thesis of the book is basically a tiny group of people are trying to render you obsolete. Almost none of us want them to succeed, but we're letting them do it for three reasons. The first is that we are not aware that it's happening. The second is that we don't think that it might succeed. And the third is that we don't think we can stop it. And the book is just essentially going through all of those, and making the case that we can and should stop it.
So we don't know. We don't think it will work.
Yeah.
And we don't think we can actually stop it. So we have lack of agency.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. That's actually a very useful, I think, sort of division of the ways in which people struggle to engage with this. I think, most firmly in the third camp. Like, I think it probably will work.
Yeah.
I think I probably will be rendered obsolete. And yeah, I don't think I have very much power. Maybe you can convince me of that a bit later. For the time being, though, I want to stick with this this sort of objection people often have, which is exactly about this. Who is giving this argument? Musk is saying it will end the world. Sam Altman is saying it will end the world. He's actually stopped saying that recently. And
well, he kind of restarted saying it. Like he's gone back and forth on it. It's hard to say with him.
I guess it depends when when it's useful for kind of funding streams.
Yes.
Right? But the point is that it doesn't necessarily matter if people are have a vested interest in saying something. It could also be true. Right? I think that's the argument you're making. And so let's just clarify who you are, perhaps, for our audience, first of all, because you have you wrote a famous article, kind of viral article, Confessions of a McKinsey Whistleblower. What were you doing at McKinsey? And why did you leave?
Yeah. I worked at McKinsey in college and out of college. I worked for government clients, largely including Rikers Island, the New York City jail complex, and ICE in D.C. when Trump became president. And I was tasked with building the hiring models for the deportation officers that Trump wanted to hire during the first administration. And I was concerned about this. A bunch of people on the team were, and we had a meeting with a senior partner and everyone else on the team on the ICE project. And the partner, I remember at the time saying like, oh, McKinsey partners do a lot of work on political things they don't agree with necessarily. For instance, implementing Obamacare. And we just do execution. We don't do policy.
Yeah.
And in the call, I remember saying something like, well, what would have stopped us from procuring barbed wire for concentration camps? And he said something about McKinsey being a values-based institution. But at the time, there was nothing in McKinsey's values about doing good in the world. It was always doing right by your client. I left a bit later, but then I wrote an anonymous essay for Current Affairs about McKinsey called Capital's Willing Executioners, using that framework to explain how McKinsey is this kind of amoral accelerant of the worst parts of capitalism, and then became a source for various news articles and a book about McKinsey, and then wrote this story in the Nation that was like coming out and naming my clients, which had not been done before. And I didn't really think about it in this way, but I do think there's a connection between that and the work that I'm doing now, where I saw the kind of depravity of corporate America and one of its most elite institutions, like at the age of 22 or 23, and how the adults in the room were so willing to go along with what was, to me, a very clear humanitarian nightmare in the making. And then fast forward to these AI companies, which I think in many ways, some of them are behaving much worse than McKinsey. Like the OpenAI non-disparagement, non-disclosure agreement fiasco, where they conditioned these extremely intense lifetime agreements on getting the equity that employees had earned while at the company. And we're just doing a lot more than McKinsey ever did to silence me or anyone else, while also claiming to be building the most consequential technology ever created that could literally kill everybody in their telling. And so I've talked to whistleblowers from the companies. I've been on both sides of it now, and I think just seeing like really at a young age, just like what these institutions are capable of and what they will abide, made me very worried about them being in control of a technology that could be much, much more dangerous than ICE, than a prison system, than anything else that we've made.
I guess I see, and we'll come on to what those dangers are in a second. I guess I see a different set of connections between the work of McKinsey and the work of AI. It is not for nothing that OpenAI gave McKinsey a little plaque to put up in their office, which says, in honor of having prompted 100 billion tokens of words out of ChatGPT, and the way in which we think about the sort of the style of ChatGPT is not dissimilar from this perhaps slightly kind of vapid generic advice that you might get from management consultancy, right? There's a feeling that there is like a corporate speak that suffuses this stuff, and also so that's sort of one connection or one kind of similarity you might see between LLMs at their current state, certainly ChatGPT and McKinsey. And the other connection that you might think about is that exactly what you're saying, McKinsey don't do policy, right? We don't have opinions about things.
Yeah.
We just execute. And I think one of the ways in which people think about AI risk a lot is that, okay, well, if you just had this tool that was very powerful and someone who was very malevolent, someone who was maybe a deeply insecure narcissist, what would they do with the tool? Right. And so in some ways, like the AI substitutes for management consultancy, right? The AI just becomes management consultancy in that figure. Is that how things are going to go? Because it feels like that's not the kind of, when you think about the replacement of labor by AI, it's perhaps not obvious that that's where people normally start thinking about labor being replaced with management consultants.
Yeah. I mean, Ted Chiang wrote, is AI the new McKinsey for the New Yorker, and made an argument like this. I mean, in the book, I actually analogize today's LLMs to consultants. They're kind of like consultants that will read up on past contexts and do a bunch of work for you, but at the end of some amount of time, they just forget everything and disappear, and then a new consultant comes in, and the length of time that they can handle is going up. And they're better and faster at doing the work, but it's not somebody who's going to replace your whole workforce. And maybe, the time horizon can increase to the point where they can just fully internalize an entire project and complete it end to end. That would take a human, a month or a year. But I think the thing that humans do is like they learn on the job, and AI doesn't really do that. They'll have these memory features, and they'll, but what they're doing is they're writing notes to themselves. They're kind of like, it's like Memento. It's like they're writing down things for future instances to learn from. And that has gone pretty far, but I think it's not going to go all the way. And so there's a lot of work going into making AIs that will learn from experience fluidly the way an employee would. And if you crack that, I think that a lot of the limitations of these systems start to go away, and they become more of a full-on labor replacement, which is the stated goal of the industry. That is the obsoleting project, as I describe it in the book. And people will point out these limitations, and the industry is intensely aware of them and spending basically unprecedented sums of money to try and solve all of these problems. And so they've solved many problems so far. And I want to clarify that I don't think that our obsolescence is guaranteed, even if we don't stop it. There might be technical barriers. There might be, limitations to how smart we are. We might just not be able to do it. But there's not a clear thing. There's not like some scientist went out and looked into it and were like, oh, there's this one thing that we'll never be able to get over. It's more like, yeah, the progress keeps happening. Everyone who says the progress will stop has been wrong for 14 years, basically. And so why should we not expect it to continue? I think that is the far more reasonable default. At the very least, we should be prepared for it continuing and not put all of our eggs in the we'll be saved by the bubble or the wall that deep learning is hitting or something else that requires us or really exempts us from having to do a bunch of hard work and organizing.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I think that's a very neat way of phrasing it. People might object to your 14 years there because they might say, well, ChatGPT only came out in 2024.
The deep learning revolution began in 2012. Yeah.
You are referring to DeepNet, Deep Learning and AlexNet, all the way back here, right? Which is the kind of the first tool that is able to pass the image recognition test with kind of flying colors, like massive improvement on working out whether or not that's a picture of a cat or it's a picture of a dog, which was until 2012, a really difficult task. So you've laid out a pretty clear picture there of what the obsolescing project is. It is the complete wholesale replacement of labor by capital, which substitutes for labor, right? So this, of course, is a very dramatic vision of disempowerment, right, of the global workforce. There are lots of reasons to be skeptical of exactly this story. And I want to kind of go through them one by one because I think it's important to have this debate rather than actually kind of scaremonger or to be worried about something that we don't really understand. One question I want to ask about the obsolescing project, as you've put it sort of together there, the wholesale replacement of labor by capital in the form of LLMs or the form of AI, which is LLMs plus some new innovation, perhaps. We don't know exactly what final form the architecture will take. One thing that you could ask about that project, right, is how deliberate is it? When you're saying an obsolescing project, are you pointing to someone like Elon Musk or Sam Altman or Dario Amodei or Demis Hassabis? These are the leaders of the various AI labs. And you're saying they have this explicit project in their heads and they are trying to do this thing with with labor, with the organized power of the working class? Or is it just simply a sort of effect of, or a sort of structural condition or an emergent thing that happens because technology systematically replaces labor in capitalism and then labor comes back and does something else? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's quite deliberate. OpenAI's mission statement is to ensure that safe and beneficial artificial general intelligence is created. And they define AGI as a highly autonomous system that can outperform humans at most economically valuable work. And OpenAI has been the leader in this space. It's unclear if they are anymore, but I think that is just a very nice, it's nice that they just wrote that out. And they're now saying, like Sam Altman recently tweeted something like, we're not trying to replace humans. But that's bullshit. That is absolutely what they're trying to do. And the other companies are doing the same thing. They're all explicitly trying to build AI that can improve itself and train successive generations. And the thinking is that if you can fully automate that process, AI could get better very, very fast. And it could then do all of the other tasks. It could, right now, AI researchers and engineers are doing all this work to obsolete themselves, but also obsolete investment bankers and programmers and whatever. And if they can fully automate their jobs, then they can fully automate the process of obsoleting every other job too. And that's kind of the only way to really explain the gargantuan amounts of money that are being put into this. The total addressable market of automating all labor is whatever, wages exist right now. And that is
about 50 trillion, I think.
Yeah. It's like most of the world economy. And that would be shifting like the 2/3 split of the economy that goes towards labor, making it go 100% to capital. And that is like, oh, that kind of makes sense of why these companies are spending, $500+ billion a year just to build out the physical infrastructure. And that's before even getting into the investments in the various companies. And there is a circular quality to all of this that we can get into. But yeah, it like continues to work. The return on investment has been positive so far. The models continue to get better. Revenues go up for these companies at unprecedented speeds. And so far, the obsoleting project is making a lot of people very rich, and it's aspirationally doing that at the expense of everyone else's employment.
That's a very bleak picture of the future. And of course, it would take a lot of organizing to prevent that. But what's interesting is that the dominant response on the left has mostly not been to say, this is something we need to stop urgently because it will systematically disempower the whole of labor in favor of capital, right? That complete power flip from one to the other. But there's been a proliferation of reasons that we don't really need to worry, or reasons that we need to focus on something else. And I am not against there being lots of things that could be concerned about with AI, right? It's a massive infrastructural project. It's a really radical transformation, perhaps not quite on the scale of the Industrial Revolution, but like something like that. So I'm not against there being lots of different concerns. Water, electricity, and so on, like use of land for data centers and so on. These are all real concerns. And I don't want to diminish any of that. But we have another collection of reasons not to worry that I want to go through sort of step by step, because I think that they're somewhat sort of misleading. One of them is that AI is just, so to speak, a marketing term. I read the YouTube comments. So if you're watching and you're commenting, I'll read your comment. This is what, when we talked to Luke Kemp, who actually blurbed your book and recommended that you come on the podcast. When we had our discussion about AI in that episode, this is one of the main comments that we got. So AI is just a marketing term, right? It's not a coherent thing. It's just a kind of way of scaring people. Now, I totally understand that. Like, I'm not dunking on anyone here, but like, I do want to understand what your response to that objection is when people say it's just a marketing term. Like, how do you understand what people are trying to get out there, and what would you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, I would acknowledge that it started out as a marketing term. The very first AI conference was put on by some people in Dartmouth in 1956, and they came up with the term to get funding for the conference, which they successfully did. And, so in that sense, yes, it did start out that way. It does sort of capture the aspiration of the field. Like, they were trying to get funding, but I think they actually were trying to create machine intelligence, artificial intelligence. I would say that in the past, this critique held more water. So when the focus on AI was what's known as good old-fashioned AI, like these kind of expert systems that were handcrafted by people, saying that there was one umbrella didn't make a ton of sense, because the people who made Deep Blue, which beat Garry Kasparov in chess, like that system could not play checkers, and it didn't really say anything about how fast other AI was progressing. Yeah. The thing that is different now is deep learning. And so we talked about AlexNet in 2012. This is just an approach to AI that uses multiple layers of neural networks to learn from data. So you can just show examples to machines and then train them in such a way that they like learn how to discern a dog from a cat or predict what word comes next. And this, combined with hardware like NVIDIA's graphics processing units, GPUs, allowed researchers to, instead of telling by hand how AI systems should identify things or whatever, just throw in a bunch of data, throw in a bunch of computing power, and then produce a model that does better than the state of the art at recognizing images or something else. And if you look at next token prediction, LLMs, the thing that power ChatGPT, it's powered by the transformer, which is this architecture. Oh, nice. And GPT stands for generative pre-trained transformer. And the transformer architecture is also powering every other type of AI you've heard of recently. So the image generation, image recognition, audio generation, video generation, like all of it. And the fact that chatbots got really good, and then image generation got pretty good afterwards, and then video generation got pretty good after that, like it's not an accident. It's all being driven by this massive scale up in computing power, massive scale up in data, improvements to the architecture of how you train these models. And now there really is like a thing that unifies all of this together. And it's just like working really well at doing a bunch of things. And we talked about some of the limitations, and some of those still exist. And, there's not a clear path to solving them right now, in the sense that like, you're not going to incrementally solve the continual learning problem that we talked about necessarily. But, there's just been a lot of progress in a lot of different domains. And that progress is having implications in the real world.
I guess the way of solving that would be some sort of like, the continual learning process would be you have sort of federated learning, right? So this is something that Anthropic came out with a couple of days ago even, they called dreaming, which allows supposedly Claude to learn from a certain degree of experience and then sort of integrate that back into a main model. I'm not sure exactly how that works. Maybe it's close to what you were saying earlier, where the model simply sort of between its own iterations writes down notes to itself about who you are, what the project is, what it's supposed to be doing, and so on. But yeah, there are kind of steps towards that. So maybe incremental transformation. Maybe there would need to be a big architectural leap, but there are some sort of small steps towards things like that. But then, so we get to the transformer, and since the invention of the transformer, as you're saying, like it stops being essentially a marketing term. Because, and this is the graph that we sort of looked at earlier, I didn't describe what it was, there is this time horizon of software tasks. So this is how long it takes for a human to do a software task that an LLM can complete 80% of the time. So in the early 2019, right? So when ChatGPT 2, which was never released as a like a thing you could interact with very easily, when it was released, it could do like 4 or 5 seconds of a task.
I think for 80%, it could do like nothing. I'm not sure.
Yeah. It was so erratic that it was like not even 80% could basically do nothing. ChatGPT 3 could do a few things. ChatGPT 3.5, which is the one that people first started to interact with when they did ChatGPT. This could do about 36 seconds of tasks on average. So a thing that would take you as a human about 36 seconds to do, ChatGPT, the first version, could do with about 80% likelihood when it was running, right? First thing. That's not very long. We are now, I'm going to not include the Mythos stuff because we'll come to that later, and that's kind of maybe a bit speculative, but we are now with Gemini 3.1 Pro, just 4 years later, we are now around an hour and a half. So a task that would take you an hour and a half to do, most LLMs, the most advanced LLMs, can now do with an 80% likelihood of success. It'll take an hour and a half, right? That's a big jump. So we're going to come to our second objection here, which is actually going to be this one down here, which is the underlying technology has or will hit a limit. And people have been saying this for a very long time, right? People have been saying deep learning has been hitting a wall. There's a guy called Gary Marcus who says this a lot. In fact, he said it, going back to our graph, he said it here, just before 3.5 was released. Is deep learning hitting a wall?
So people joke in the AI safety space that like the wall is the thing that it's hitting as it, goes to the moon.
Right.
So the wall claims, I think what often happens is that you'll start running out of steam in some approach. So, pre-training the model, like feeding it more and more data, just to like get it to predict the next token. There were some news reports a while back that was running out of steam. And so people pronounced, deep learning is hitting a wall. But right as that was happening, there was this move towards inference compute. So having the model, think step by step, step by step going through problems. And it was kind of like a baton being handed off. So it's like, okay, pre-training, you might be running out of juice there, but there's this new thing that more or less allows the progress to continue. And if you look at Moore's law, this idea that the number of transistors on chips like doubles every 2 years or whatever the specific thing is, it's like a bunch of different S curves. So like it goes from slow progress to fast progress to slow progress as you run out of juice from that particular thing. But if you add up all the S curves together, it forms a smooth exponential. And so I think the same thing is happening there. And this is just like kind of a fundamental-ish property of technology development. And there will eventually be some kind of ceiling. We just don't know what the ceiling is, and it would be surprising if the ceiling were below human level capabilities, given that we exist. And maybe the ceiling is right above our level of capabilities, but that would also be pretty surprising. And so all these wall claims have like ended up just not bearing out in reality. And we are now just seeing continued progress and accelerating progress based on a lot of the recent evidence.
The level of intelligence, right, is somewhere near where humans are. Again, I agree with you that would be surprising. But like the level of intelligence is something that near humans. That doesn't mean it will look anything like humans.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't mean that we can like reason with it at that stage. And so I find it implausible that this is hitting a wall, but I also find it implausible that it is coming towards us, right, in any coherent sense. It's like it's going off in another direction. It's orthogonal, to use the sort of the term people use in the discourse.
It is one of the most distinctive and concerning points about deep learning and AI is like these systems are grown, they're not crafted. Microsoft Word, it's a very complex piece of software, but you can look at the code and see like how input goes to output. But when a deep learning model is trained, it's just a giant table of numbers. And there are these techniques that you mentioned, like mechanistic interpretability. But I think I have not looked into this in great detail myself, but there's this kind of vibe that like this has been less fruitful than people hoped. And it's just really, really hard to figure out what's going on in these systems. And so when a new model gets trained, they're kind of like poking it in a petri dish, as one person put it to me. And there is this great debate in 1960 between Norbert Wiener, who's kind of like the first guy to come up with the alignment problem, talking about like the danger and importance of programming superintelligent systems to do what we actually intend and not something else. And this contemporary of his, another pioneering computer scientist, over like whether AI is dangerous. And the other guy essentially said like, everything I just said, if neural networks work, then we'd have reason to be concerned. So back when there was no kind of debate and fault lines had not really formed, these two experts could just reason about this and agree that like, well, yeah, if we couldn't predict fundamentally how these systems would behave, then we can't really say anything with confidence about how safe they will be.
Yeah. Neural nets were invented in the 50s, right? By, I want to say, Rosenblatt?
Yes.
Yes. And then basically like forgotten about for a long time because we didn't have the compute. Right, we didn't have like the physical speed of computers that you need to get results out of.
There was also some smearing happening. Like I think Marvin Minsky made some claims that like they would never be able to do something, but then if you added other layers, he also showed that they would be able to do that thing. And it's kind of there's a lot of academic turf wars at the root of a lot of these debates that are still happening to this day.
Which means that if you are currently involved in an academic turf war, that might have real historical consequences. So you should carry on. Right?
As long as you're on the right side of it, yeah.
People are telling you that you're exaggerating the stakes. No, stakes could be enormous. So the other kind of collection of objections here, and I want to add a new one to my list I didn't include, is essentially that like technologies have always replaced labor, right? Like there is always this kind of slow process of the shifting away from a particular set of activities. Agricultural work, I've got a quote here, agricultural work evaporated with the coming of threshers and harvesters, typesetters and newspaper printers were automated out of existence, elevator and switchboard operators faded away, and longshoremen's working rhythms changed dramatically with global containerization. So you are saying something much more radical than that, right? Than the kind of the normal progress, what's called the normal technology discourse about AI. Why is AI different from like a normal technology that simply comes along and says, okay, we're going to slightly change the structure of this job, but you go and get another job, or you just like don't have to do that particular task, but you keep on doing the rest of the tasks in your job and you have more time for them, right? Why is it not like that?
I mean, every other type of technology, even the fairly general purpose ones, were less general purpose than this technology. right? So if you made a thresher, it wasn't going to then produce like the next iteration of the thresher. But if you make AI that can improve on AI systems as well as humans do, then that could theoretically get you all the way to general intelligence and then super intelligence, like whatever that looks like.
Which is, we should say, that is unproven, right? Like the
It's unproven.
possibility of making that, like otherwise we would have a sort of a takeoff scenario that we're not currently in.
Yeah, I mean, but that's what they're working towards. That's what the economy is increasingly being bet on, is that working out. And it's like the universality of it, I would say. And nothing has allowed capital to fully substitute for labor. Every machine historically has required humans to, be administering it, maintaining it, manufacturing it, whatever. And now there's like a path to automating AI R&D, to automating all knowledge work, to automating all physical work once you can build robots that can do what humans can do. And that's not to say that there won't be any jobs for people in that world. There will be jobs where we prefer to have a human on the other end, like therapy or live music or sex work or massage or many things. But, it would be a massive, maybe the biggest change in the social system and the fastest, almost certainly, ever. And I'm not somebody who's like wedded to wage labor being the way people make their income forever. But I think the disempowerment of people, the removal of their labor power and thus their economic power, and then eventually their political power, especially in the current institutional arrangement, is extremely dangerous. And I think there's this idea on the left that like, well, if we just had socialism, we could build these systems safely and just automate all work, fully automated luxury communism. But we're very far from that, for one. And the second is that I think there would still be a lot of risks involved, and we can get into that later, maybe.
I feel like that the idea that there would be a AI that could do everything that humans can do, right? We might prefer a human. Isn't that sort of in tension with what we've been talking about, with this idea of the spiky, the jagged frontier of capabilities, right? Aren't these things in contradiction? So why are we, is that frontier of capabilities becoming more smooth, right? Are they getting significantly better at things they're not very good at? And are they just sort of staying still on places they're really good at? That's not my impression, right?
Yeah.
Claude Code is like way better at coding, or Claude Opus 4.7 is way better at coding than Claude 4 was, but it hasn't got like massively better at the kind of task it's not very good at. So there's a kind of it feels like it's leaning into its capabilities, right? Rather than so why are we positing a thing that is in this kind of AGI way, equally good as humans as everything,
right?
Sorry,
yeah.
So as humans at everything.
I think like humans are jagged, right? Like if you were going to plot us on some kind of like picture of what we're good at, it would be like really good at some things. We're great at like reading emotions. We're not so good at doing math or playing chess or whatever. And then, yeah, some of us have the inverse of this.
Also really bad at chess and also really bad at maths. Like it's a clean sweep.
Well, if we think of like, the very best people in each of these domains, like we can get like the frontier of like human capabilities. And then we could overlay, the frontier of AI capabilities. And in some places, the AI has matched humans more or less. In some places, overtaken them. In some places, it's far below. And I think the kind of goal of the industry is to automate, AI R&D. This is their stated, ultimate goal, at least the ultimate intermediate goal on the step towards automating all work. And to automate AI R&D, you'll require a level of general capabilities that I think is pretty close to what people call AGI. There's this kind of like idea that some people have, which is like, oh, well, this will just be strictly easier than AGI. And that's true, but it'll be much easier, I don't think is right. Because it's not just like automating writing code. For instance, code is basically, writing code by hand now is basically optional. But software engineering is not gone away. And there's a lot more to it than that. And in fact, the hardest parts of it are not writing the code itself. It's like thinking through how the system should work, like designing it. I'm not a programmer, but like yeah, there's still humans required for that process. And the types of things that AI is not progressing in as quickly, kind of like the taste, the kind of intuition, the judgment, humans are just much stronger at this. At least the people who are good at those tasks are much stronger at this than the models are. But, I hear that Mythos is better at taste than, Opus 4.7. And if the industry, can continue making progress on this stuff, then it will, match humans in the relevant respects. And maybe AI won't be able to write a novel as well as the best people. And maybe it never really will. But I don't think that's the thing that will save us from the thing that's scary, which is automating not just AI research, but all scientific research and development. That is how humans have been able to dominate the world, through technology and institutions and kind of ideas. And if AI can automate that process, then I think all of the really crazy, very science fiction sounding things become conceivable on timelines that would, I think, shock people.
Give us a picture of an obsolete global working class.
Yeah.
What do people do in that world? Because you've referred earlier to the kind of the Falk fully automated luxury communism framework, which of course was, everyone knows, right? Aaron Bastani, who founded Novara Media, is the person who came out with that. Yeah, this is not a sort of a rogue idea in this context. We are a long way from that path, right? We are a long way from that. And so, what does it look like if we don't get universal basic income, universal basic services, and the thing you are saying is likely to happen, the obsolescing project? What happens to us? What do we look like? What do we do? Are we alive?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say if we're lucky, but I think that the least lucky outcomes are ones where we're alive, but we'd rather we not be, which I think are unfortunately on the table. I guess I would say broadly, political leaders have three paths to pursue with respect to this technology, assuming it continues to advance. One is they could invest in social welfare, building a modern welfare state that accounts for human labor being obsolete. Two is they could try to stop the obsoleting project. Or three is they could invest in tools of repression to keep people from rising up in the face of an otherwise intolerable set of circumstances. And at least in the United States, you have Republicans cutting Medicaid and adding work requirements while investing in mass surveillance and lethal autonomous weapons. So it seems like they're kind of picking a lane right now. So if you follow that path outward, the industry continues to automate labor. And this could happen kind of incrementally at first, but then as certain capability thresholds are reached, it could happen very, very quickly. The nature of exponentials are hard for us to understand, but I think COVID makes that pretty clear. In January, February, you could kind of see it coming, but then almost none of us were really thinking a month from now, our lives are going to be changed indefinitely. And so once you get AI that can really do the median, knowledge worker's job end to end, if that happens, then oh shit, the adoption could be very quick. And the companies that don't adopt it will be outcompeted by the ones that do. If it becomes possible to run a multi-billion-dollar company with 10% of the staff, maybe the incumbents will hold out on using it because of institutional dynamics or whatever. And then some new sales force springs up that, requires way, way less labor. And suddenly the old Salesforce, amazing, is scrambling and maybe gets eaten by this other one, cuts a bunch of jobs and whatever. And so this could happen pretty quickly. And it could also kind of feed on itself. And I think an important thing to say here is that the AI does not actually need to be as good as people at the thing. It needs to be good enough, because when the systems can do human work, they can often do it 100 times faster and 100 times cheaper. Right now, that's for well-specified tasks. That's not accounting for all the work it takes to get those tasks into a shape that the AI can handle really nicely. But if you can build the universal obsoleting machine, which is what I call AGI in the book, then it wouldn't need all of that. You would just like connect it to your systems. It would onboard the way a human would, and it would be just much, much cheaper. And so I think that the global economy, it's kind of like a game of musical chairs, where wherever you are positionally is like where you stay. And for AI labor, the wages effectively of the AI are cheaper than even the cheapest humans in a lot of cases. And so if you're a company, or if you're a country like the United States and you have access to these companies and you can tax them, maybe you have like this incredible windfall and you can pay workers and displace people basic income or basic services or whatever the thing is, and kind of like ameliorate the conditions a bit for them. But if you are a country in, like Ethiopia, like, or Bangladesh or something, like you don't have access to that. And even the United Kingdom doesn't have the ability to tax Google, even though DeepMind is, a British company. It's like now owned by Google. And I don't know where to find this, but somebody wrote a Substack post about how the UK could get really screwed by AI automating jobs by basically decreasing the amount of income that could be taxed because it's like wage labor, and then that gets shifted into capital, which the UK taxes less, and it like creates this kind of like death spiral of government services going down at the time when they're needed most. And so, yeah, this is like a bleak picture. It's hard to predict all these things. There's complex dynamics, and some people will say like, look, if production is happening at that level, it'll be super cheap. These goods and services will become like extremely deflated. And then people will just live in abundance because, yeah, like everything's automated. But there will still be, even if that happens at some point, there will be this like really intense transition. And there's also just like we've set up our entire society around people like working for their income, working for their meaning. A lot of our welfare systems require people to be looking for work. And so I just don't think anyone is prepared for this. And I don't think anyone thinks that anyone is prepared for this. And they're mostly just hoping it doesn't happen, or they're saying we'll figure it out if and when it does.
I do want to get to that feeling of intensity, right? Because the COVID analogy that you made a while ago is really like, I feel that deeply because I was very attentive to COVID in January 2020, right? A friend of mine who is in a bunch of like Telegram sort of like breaking news channels sent me this thing, and he was quite alarmed, and his alarm was contagious, right? Obviously COVID also very contagious. And so we both sort of had this moment of recognition of what was happening. And I did some sort of back of the envelope calculations about how long it was taking for, things to double. And I think I got to say, well, there'll be 1 million cases in the UK by May. I think I was actually not far off the actual number of cases there were.
Wow.
And I was on the phone to my parents, and I was like, this is the Spanish flu. You've got to take this really seriously. I know you lived through SARS. I know you lived through the kind of the other various like explosions of viruses that were then very quickly contained. I understand all that. This is different. And I think, and there are two things to say about that, right? One is that it wasn't the Spanish flu, right? It wasn't at that scale, right? It was very, very bad. Lots of people suffered enormously. Lots of people died. Lots of people were permanently disabled. But it wasn't the Spanish flu. And partly it wasn't the Spanish flu because the Spanish flu happens at the end of World War I, where lots of people are like already in a very, very bad state. And 2020 wasn't quite like that. And so, I feel instinctively I was right to worry about this exponential curve of a thing that was coming towards me. And at the same time, I was actually massively exaggerating that. And when I get into that state about AI, when I start to worry about AI, I feel like I am living in the last moments of recorded time, right? Like everything is about to change completely. And I recognize completely that is absurd. Or like not absurd, but it feels just like a ridiculous narrative. That couldn't possibly be true. And I wonder, like, how do you personally deal with that feeling of the magnitude of the thing you are looking at, and not saying, it's the end of everything. From now on in, the Shoggoths go to the stars and so on. Like all of humanity is destroyed, right? Which is not what you're saying. But how do you avoid that feeling of overcorrection for the lack of worry people around you seem to have in a moment that seems to you like desperation?
Yeah. I mean, I think it is important to know that people have predicted doomsday forever.
Right.
And they've been wrong, right? Like, obviously, we're here. The population bomb, people thought nuclear war was inevitable. Like, all of these things, historically, there have been a set of people who have been like, not saving for retirement or whatever because they were working at the Rand Corporation. And they're like, there's no way we don't go to war and blow everything up with these massive nuclear stockpiles. And maybe that just means like quantum immortality is real, or the anthropic bias. Like the fact that we're here means that stuff didn't happen. So therefore, whatever. Let's set that aside, and say that like
in SF, like completely. Not like not an AI worker. So don't dismiss him on the basis. I also I love sci-fi. So like maybe that's something in there as well. But keep going, sorry.
No, it's. I think the claim with AI is that this time it is different. It is different from past technologies. It's different from past, societal, whatever, like processes. And I think that arguments like should be measured against the backdrop of like people just being wrong about these things historically. I also would say that I have a kind of like optimistic disposition, and there's some part of me that is like feels like things will be fine. And maybe it's just like the lucky life that I've led, which also happens to coincide with like the people at these companies have been very lucky as well, and have often not known like real hardship. And I think that does blind them to how bad things can get. But I don't know. I think the kind of dissonance between what I believe is possible and on the horizon and how normal life feels, in rich cities in America. We're at war with a major country, and I don't have a car, so the gas prices don't like directly, like I'm affected by these things, but so removed from them that like even these like very consequential things where people are dying and like the global economy is like, in crisis because of these decisions, like, it's hard to be like, oh yes, but this other thing will actually, affect me. It will like mean my life looks radically different from the lives of my, every past generation, and also might come to an abrupt end or live in dystopia or whatever. I think you just have to like hold all of those possibilities in your head as possibilities, but not inevitabilities. And I think some of my confidence comes from feeling like we will get our shit together and take this seriously. And I've seen a lot of that in the last 6 months. And I kind of like live in that space where it's like, no, it'll be okay because we are going to stop it. And I had to convince myself of that first, and then hopefully convince other people of it as well.
I want to get to our final objection here on the board, which is a knotty and complicated one, right?
Yeah.
Which is that the economics of AI are not sustainable, and that AI constitutes itself a kind of bubble. And there's lots to say about this. I really want to get you and Ed Zitron on a debate. If you want to see that, let me know in the comments, and we'll arrange that. But like, what is the claim here that people make, that the economics of AI are not sustainable, that it's a sort of financial circus, that it's sort of constituted by circular capital flows and so on, which we had on the board a few episodes ago. Like, what is the claim here, and what do you make of that claim?
Yeah. I mean, so the distinctive thing about the AI companies is that they are not profitable, and they are burning capital at a rate that is unprecedented, right? So Uber is the previous record holder for the most money set on fire before it reached its first quarter of profitability. It was a bit over $30 billion, I believe. And OpenAI is projected to be in the like $120 billion range, which is just like a crazy, like that's like money like lost before reaching profitability. So, to make the money back, you'd have to like not only be profitable, but like make 120 billion in profit before people start like making new money in some sense.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of more complicated than that, but like, no, it kind of is like that. And so people look at this and they're like, this seems wrong. Like this can't actually be like, this is fake. Like it's like being subsidized, like Uber was losing money because it was being subsidized by venture capital to grow the market share until they had enough that they could just raise the prices and like destroyed taxi companies sufficiently, change the laws, et cetera. The core mistake that people are making is that they're looking at the companies and being like, oh, they're unprofitable, so therefore their products are unprofitable. And this is just not true. So when you're
how do you make that distinction? I don't really understand.
Yeah. So like it's called unit economics. So like they charge by the token, like the million token of input and output, some amount of money, like $15 per million tokens, and it costs them less than $15 to process those tokens, right? So like it might be $15 per million, and then maybe it actually costs them like $5. So you're making like $10 per million token if you're buying it through the API, which is kind of like the a la carte version that companies are often doing. And this means that the more you grow, the more profitable your company becomes. And the margins on the selling the services are actually pretty good. They're not quite as good as software because it costs more to produce like a token or respond to a prompt. Like software is amazing because you make Microsoft Excel one time and you can sell it infinite times. There's no marginal costs. Yes, exactly. And AI software, it's like, well, every time I prompt ChatGPT, it actually costs like a not negligible amount of money. I will say like the costs are dropping every year very dramatically on producing a given level of capability. And the reason that the companies are not profitable is because they're plowing all of the profits off of their products into training new models. And the training costs go up because they continue to scale up each layer of the process, because doing so produces models that are more capable. And people will pay premiums to have access to the most capable model on the market. So, DeepSeek you have on the map. When it came out, it was like, oh, it costs so little money to train this model. Those statements were really overblown and misunderstood. But it costs less money to sell the model, and then it costs to get a similar thing from OpenAI. But OpenAI's model was a bit better, and people were willing to pay that premium. And it's like so cheap when AI actually works that having like a just slightly better model is just worth paying more money. And I think that's like another thing that people don't totally understand about this is like, yeah, it's like, sure, it might cost 3 times more money to get like the OpenAI model or 15 times more money. But if it can just like do more use cases, it's still just costing like 10 to 100 times less than humans doing that thing. And so it's just worth it. And the profits, your own profits are like the cheapest form of capital. So you could raise money from VCs, and that means that you dilute your shares and you have to pay them back. Or you could use all of your profits and then raise what you can't cover from investors. And so that's what the companies are doing. And the important thing to say about this is it is predicated on the revenue growth continuing, right? So like if you train a model for $100 million and then $1 billion the next generation, and then $10 billion the next generation, and each one of those pays for itself and then a bit more and pays for the next generation a bit. But then you train one for $100 billion and it's like not any better than the $10 billion model, then you're kind of like in a tough situation. And so it's not that the models have to keep getting better like at a certain rate for it to work. They just have to keep growing their revenue at a certain rate. And I think you're seeing a lot of like stickiness, once people integrate Claude Code fully into their life and like merge with it, which, I see happening to people. GPT 5.5 comes out and they're like, my thing's working. I don't want to like figure out this. Like it becomes sticky, or you build what's known as a moat around the technology. And you see kind of more differentiation than people predicted. With DeepSeek, there was this argument that it would become commoditized, where people would just get the cheapest model that was like capable enough. But instead, you see people like Claude's personality, or they like how fast this other model is, or whatever the thing might be. And the revenue just continues to grow, and Anthropic's revenue has grown the fastest ever at the scale that it's going at, and it went from like single digits billions at the start of the year into like 30 or 40 billion annualized within like 4 or 5 months, which is just completely bonkers. And at this rate would be like the most valuable company in the world in some small number of years. And you could say like it won't continue, sure, whatever, but I don't know. Like that's what the trend has been. And everybody's been saying this won't continue. Or Zitron says like OpenAI won't be able to make good on their investments unless they do unprecedented things over and over and over again. And it's like, well, that's the entire history of OpenAI. It's been them doing unprecedented things. And so I think, people dismiss this at their peril. And even if the bubble bursts, even if there is like a dramatic decrease in the amount of investment, the technology is still far from its full adoption. I think if you stopped at today's capability levels, you would still see a lot of growth in companies figuring out ways to use this, consumers figuring out ways to use this, and it would really transform a lot of parts of life. And bubbles that are around real technologies like the internet, when they burst, the internet doesn't go away. And the internet is far, far bigger now than it was in the peak of the dot-com bubble. And so I think if the bubble bursts, that buys you some time, but it doesn't solve the problem.
I do want to come to the kind of scenario of what would happen if the bubble burst, right?
Yeah.
In part because it sort of follows on from something we've already been talking about. I think there's another argument we can make here, right? Which is that although it's possible to think about this in more or less conventional economic terms, this unit of this like set of tokens takes this much to produce, and I can charge you this much for it, and therefore I'm making a profit or I'm making a loss, right? Which is a debate that I think you and Ed Zitron should have on this show, right?
Love
because
to.
there's much more to it, and it's much more intricate than we've kind of spelled out so far. But this is basically a kind of like a return on investment question.
Yeah.
And if you think about the big strategic things that have happened in the last few years, right? For example, massive Chinese investment in solar panels or in renewable energy, or the US's enormous investment in shale oil, right? In the Obama era. It wasn't that these have better returns on investment necessarily, right? There's a complex case there for solar panels, definitely not the case for shale oil, right? What was important was that it had greater degrees of control. What was important was that the Americans could control the shale oil because it was in America or in Canada, right? And they could control that flow in a way that they couldn't control it if it was in Saudi Arabia, or control it if it was in Iraq or wherever else. And so there are more considerations than just like unit economics.
Yeah.
And so when we're thinking about things like the Stargate project, which is this enormous infrastructure project, because there is this geopolitical framing to AI, which is that America has to get there before China.
Yeah.
And in some ways, so I think I don't know enough about the unit economics, right, to really assess the debate between you and Ed Zitron, although, we should do that. I just think that the strategic imperative of doing this will mean that the US government, which $120 billion that OpenAI have lost.
That's like change. What? Yeah. A small fraction of the DoD budget.
It's not a serious concern. So in that sense, I don't think that the unit economics of it really matter. Right?
Yeah.
Because there is a larger strategic imperative. Do you agree with me? Does that like seem maybe a little bit state centric? Like how do you understand that the role of the state in this?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, so Stargate, like, I don't think the U.S. has invested in it, but the U.S. is like supporting it. And, Sam Altman's like, we couldn't have done this without you, President Trump. But it had already been announced many months before Trump was even elected.
Yes.
So that's like a bit of like smoke and mirrors by Sam. But it has the support of the government. It is also having some problems that I can't speak to in too much detail. But yes, I think I in the book I do talk about like the backstop being the federal government. And there was this talk of a backstop that OpenAI, I think their CFO floated, and everyone yelled at her. And then Joe Weisenthal from Autolots was like, well, if this is like existentially important to national security and geopolitics, then like, shouldn't there be a backstop? Like, I'm not saying there should, but that just follows. And I think he's right. I think you are right. This is the kind of like ultimate like AI is here to stay argument, especially in the post-Mythos world. I think the U.S. government is now quickly becoming more AGI pilled, as they say. As it's like, oh, if you have the best model, you can like maybe get backdoors and hack all kinds of critical infrastructure and software that everybody uses, and that seems like a really important thing to have, especially before other people. And so, I think that it's even less likely now that the government would let the industry just completely crater if it missed revenue targets. Like maybe if OpenAI missed those targets, they would be like, well, Anthropic exists and, didn't take on all these obligations. And so therefore the compute and whatever can go to Anthropic. But Anthropic's co-founder didn't donate $25 million to the Trump administration or the Trump campaigns. So I think that OpenAI will be just fine if things really hit the fan for them.
Yes, which is, and also now Anthropic have been legally declared a supply chain risk. Although
they're kind of like, the Trump administration, and Trump is kind of like, they're very smart guys over there, I think they're gonna, I've not looked into the latest on that case, but I think they've now won over the White House as like too good to ignore or too good to label a supply chain risk.
Yes, well, it turns out it's like saying that Lockheed Martin is a supply chain risk or something when they've got the F-35, and you're like, okay, well, maybe actually, we'll just forget about everything else he said about that, and we'll keep going with the F-35. This possibility, right? There is a real possibility that the AI bubble pops. I think you're right, by the way. Stargate is a private vehicle, but it's with the political backing of the US, not with the American government capital.
Tons of money from the Gulf states.
Exactly, right. So this is the Gulf investment in the US, right, which itself has this kind of strange connection to the Iran war, of course. Like part of the reason why the Gulf investment states invested in the US was to get some sort of leverage over American foreign policy in the region. And they don't seem to have got that. So if they pulled their money out, like you could really see a kind of a popping of this bubble, like a great, very, very rapidly. Not to say it is a bubble in general, but like you could really see something like go very badly wrong for these companies if the Gulf states pulled out. And then we get to this problem, right? We get to a situation that is basically a combination of a mass obsolescing, right? A mass reduction in the power of labor, and at the same time, something like the 2008 crisis, where we bail out massively wealthy companies because we want them to, because they have such structural importance in the economy. You said earlier, I think it's a great way of describing it, that not just like capital is betting on AI, but the whole of the American economy functioning has been bet on AI, right? If you just take out AI growth in the last 2 years, the US is functioning in a recession. It is just like the thing propping up the American economy at the moment, which is, of course, another reason why you might say it's a bubble, because it just seems like a thing that people have to carry on with because there's no way of stopping it without entering recession, right? And so what do you think the political response would be if that bubble popped, if there was some sort of, the unit economics didn't work out, or there was some sort of massive evacuation of cash? If the US government doubles down and ultimately becomes the backstop of these assets, what are the politics of that moment? Because for me, they look dynamic, dramatic, terrifying. It's
a good question. I think one thing the government is likely to do, at least the Trump administration, is take equity stakes in the companies that it's bailing out, both because it's done this with Intel and because they can make a story, be like, well, these companies were irresponsible and they built this important thing, but like it's too important now to be left in their own hands. And so in exchange for us bailing them out, we're going to take 10% or whatever it might be, and make sure that they are doing things the right way. And then I guess the politics of AI are moving very quickly, and the antipathy towards the industry and the technology itself is growing a lot. And so it depends on kind of when this happens, but I think the politics of bailing out the industry will just be pretty gnarly. And Trump is really downstream of the mishandling of the financial crisis by the Obama administration. And so I think it will be a really, really tough political situation for the Trump administration kind of either way. it's hard to game out. I could see, I mean, there's this argument that during recessions, you cut jobs, and then that's where you get a lot of the efficiency gains from automation. And so, companies have been investing a lot in AI to keep up with each other, and because of their experiencing FOMO, but they might also just like increase even more in it as a result of like needing to cut costs on labor. And so I don't know, it's hard to see like the demand itself going down a ton because again, like once people figure out, the reason the revenues are going up so much for Anthropic is like people figured out Claude Code could do a lot more than just coding, and the models got good enough that you can just increase the amount of subscriptions. I know lots of people went from like $20 a month to $200 a month subscriptions, many of whom were not programmers. And then companies were obviously doing this at a really large scale. So yeah, I don't want to be like, oh, there's no way that this could happen. Like, I think that, the demand side, I think will continue to be there. And yeah, I think the political reaction will be very intense and very negative. There may be like, I guess, a chance for policy change to happen. And if the industry is like no longer propping up the economy, but instead this like drag on it, then I think the main thing that's kind of justifying its existence and its continued progress towards our collective obsolescence looks a lot weaker. Because right now it's like, if the politics, let's say like, the anti-AI, the people who want to stop the obsoleting project, like they get the better hand of the political situation. And a year from now, there's this big mass movement and people are like demanding like the industry be stopped from trying to render us obsolete. The thing that the industry is going to say, the thing that Jensen Huang is going to say, the NVIDIA CEO, to President Trump is like, look, the economy needs us. Like without us, there's no growth. Without us, you're in a recession or a depression. And like we are too big to fail. And so, or too big to like be stopped. And I think that is going to be like the hardest argument to overcome. And so if it turns out that like the bubble bursts and it's now this drag, then like I could see that argument lessening, and it also does decrease the urgency of stopping it because it would, move timelines out, I think, by a bit at least. So it's hard to say, and I am scared to have said all of that because I will be held accountable for whatever happens in the future and the terrible predictions I just made.
Oh, right. No, that's fine. This is the work of political pundits, right?
Yes, so, yeah, right. You're never held accountable.
Pontificate about,
Yeah.
Although, if you start doing the confidence interval stuff, you can train yourself to be a good forecaster, right? It is a possible thing to do. And you should hold your political pundits to account for their own capacity to be accurate and calibrated to the world. Essential. So in this scenario, right, capital starts to substitute for labor. We have perhaps briefly what we might call a centaur phase. A centaur phase is basically where, like a centaur, you have sort of one half horse, goat, donkey.
I think horse.
What is a centaur? A horse, right?
Yeah.
And then a one half person, right? And that's in the horse there is the AI, and the person is the person, right? That's a sort of a collaborative working between people. In that phase, you can still get quite intensified wage repression. That's part of the dynamic of the obsolescing machine. And then when that gets past, when the system has become fully reproducing, if that's possible, theoretically speaking, then I think we enter into something that I have been calling, and it's slightly speculative, and I don't know if we have a kind of a way of thinking about it, is essentially a kind of class struggle between humans and AI. So a previous episode of the podcast that we did was about the changing nature of the person, right? The changing question of who counts as a person. And this is going to sound a bit galaxy brain for most people, so apologies for that, but I think it's important to consider. One of them is the possibilities that we might give animals people, or the environment consider it as a person, and then a whole bunch of other ones. Obviously, we have corporations that are legally speaking people already.
Yeah.
I don't think it's that implausible that we might start to have AIs arguing for their own personhood, regardless of whether or not they become conscious, which I think is quite unlikely, regardless whether or not they have like personhood in the kind of way we think about it, I can see the possibility of there being people demanding payment for their labor.
Yeah.
Right? Not the company that owns the AI, but the AI itself, right, as a separate legal entity. And then we get into this dynamic that maybe a bit far out of people, like where you have essentially a class war, right, between the machines and the people. Not like the machines controlled by people, but like the machines autonomously. That does not strike me as totally impossible.
Yeah.
Am I completely off the wall here?
Yeah, no, this is already happening. There's this performance artist named A-Ray who made some chatbot using like an open source meta model and had it post on Twitter and just like let it post and kind of shit post its way into wealth, it turns out, because a bunch of people like Mark Andreessen gave it $50,000 of cryptocurrency. It created its own cryptocurrency, or the guy created one for it, and then it like juiced that, and people used it to juice various shit coins. And I think it ended up with something on the order of like $60 million worth of crypto, and is dedicating all of that money to advancing the rights of AIs. And yeah, so this is happening. How far it will get, unclear. I think that there will be a lot of resistance to this, and I think it's important to like separate out the legal personhood question from like the sentience of the systems themselves question.
Completely. Yeah.
And like, yeah, I agree that I don't think the systems are sentient, but I also think the people who are extremely confident that they aren't or never will be are like, also like, we don't understand consciousness. Like, why would we suddenly understand that it's definitely not true in these cases? But yeah, the legal personhood thing, if AI outcompetes humans at most, labor, or the most valuable labor, and they can own their own stuff, then it's not a huge stretch to see a world where, 100 years from now, like 99% of the stuff is owned by AIs, even where humans are around. And like maybe life is, in a material sense, like pretty good compared to how it is now because of the massive increase in production and deflation and the price of goods and services and new technologies and products and whatever that people like. But we're just kind of like a marginal part of the world. And an analogy I've heard is like the aristocracy in the UK, where, they technically have these titles and land, but not really like the power or the money that anywhere close to what they used to have, because they kind of locked into this old, social arrangement that got obsoleted itself. And so, yeah, I think it's quite nerve-wracking to imagine these systems they're owning their own stuff. And then also it's nerve-wracking to imagine them being better than us at the most important things, regardless of who owns their stuff, because, it's going to be the companies and rich people. And I think like if you build, AGI, the obsoleting machine, it's going to be an accelerant on the world, and whoever has capital, whoever is building the things, and whoever is early to adopt them. And I think that is not a world I would like to accelerate.
In which case, what else do you do?
Yeah.
What is the project?
Yeah.
That is not acceleration.
Yeah. So you've brought up AI reform. So this is my bid to kind of unify the three-sided debate around AI existential risk. So I'd separate it between like the worriers, people who are concerned that AI could disempower humans, kill everybody potentially, also known as doomers pejoratively. The boosters or accelerationists who just want to move faster, think that AI is amazing, will make the world amazing, and anyone who's trying to stop it is doing a bad thing. And then the critics, the people who are kind of skeptical of the technology's potential or current capabilities and want to highlight all the ways that it's causing harm now. And through this, I pitch this idea called AI reform. And the thesis is kind of like deep learning is amazing, but it's being pointed at the wrong things by the wrong people for the wrong reasons. We should democratically control it. We should stop the obsoleting project, and we should point deep learning toward solving specific social problems. And so the industry likes to tout all these amazing things like, oh, AI just solved this open math problem, or it, cracked protein folding. But these are just marginal investments for these companies. They're investing in obsoleting programmers and investment bankers because those are high margin activities that people will pay a lot of money to have products that can do that labor. And so AlphaFold is this amazing thing that like solved an open problem in biology, which is like, how do you predict how a protein will fold based on its molecular structure? And this used to take like a PhD, an entire PhD, and $100,000 to $200,000 per protein. And then DeepMind, with Demis Hassabis and John Jumper, built a deep learning system that solved the problem. It just predicted every protein that we had. And it was able to do that because people had predicted a bunch of proteins previously and like just enough to actually solve it, it turns out. And this is like an amazing thing. And just like, I think they deserve credit for pursuing that. But it had no effect on Google's stock price, basically, despite solving this like very, very real problem. And then ChatGPT comes out.
On drug development?
I think it is being used for a bunch of things. And like I wish I could speak more to like exactly what the utility is. But this is like one of the grand challenges of biology. It won them the Nobel Prize.
Yeah. Although it did get the model, I think in its latest edition, it is only accessible through like an API you have to pay for.
They did open source it, but after a lot of criticism, because within AlphaFold they made a third version of it that did even better. It could predict like some other thing, and they didn't open source it, and they throttled access, and then got a bunch of pushback, and then they did open source that. And so there was like this commercialization and closing of like the commons of this technology,
which is of course one of the major objections to AI, right? Which is that it takes the vast reams of information and knowledge and human experience that we've recorded and privatizes it and then sells it back to you in a kind of slurry or a fatberg, as I like to describe it.
But
keep going with the reform.
Yeah. So, the question is like, how do you get more things like AlphaFold and less things like chatbot psychosis or our obsolescence? And I think this will require people getting organized and forming a movement. I think there's a lot of kind of nascent movements and things in that direction starting up around AI. And I think hopefully this could be a label to unify that work and coordinate it. Because right now there's a lot of people kind of talking past one another, arguing, like the critics and the worriers often argue with one another about the technology's capabilities. Meanwhile, the industry are de facto boosters and accelerationists that have, until recently, the full backing of the federal government, and they have like all the money in the world. And I think that like this is a way to recognize the technology's potential already and its potential in the future without being like, and therefore we should let the industry keep doing what it's doing, which is like not delivering the kind of AI that we collectively actually want. And so, but like then touting all of these amazing discoveries. And it's like, we could have way more of the discoveries and way more of the good stuff if we use industrial policy, regulation, subsidies, and democratic oversight and control to deliver the types of AI that actually solve specific problems. So like, don't build the everything machine to cure cancer, just try and cure cancer.
I guess the difficulty with that, right, is that we've demonstrated if there is the bitter lesson, right, which is a famous paper in the history of AI, if there is a bitter lesson, it is that actually neatly targeted specific use cases for AI is not as effective as simply training on everything, like simply scaling the AI and then picking out the kind of use cases that you want from the massively scaled model. And so I see how that aligns with the warriors, right? Because you don't have the obsolescing project, but you do have cured cancer. I can see why it mollifies the critics, right? I don't see how that allows the boosters to do what they want to do, which is really this kind of intelligence explosion, sort of in some ways for its own sake.
Yeah. I mean, I think the bitter lesson is like something people should, especially in the industry, like they've really taken to heart. And it is true at some level that like, if you build the obsoleting machine, AGI, you and can keep it under control and doing what you want, you can get to like the magical technologies faster. And so this is not a claim that like you'll get to, techno utopia or something as fast as possible. But more that like the obsoleting project is extremely dangerous and it's democratically illegitimate. It's happening without people's buy-in or even their awareness in many cases. And so, yeah, we should not be doing that until we can like make sure it's safe and actually have people make an informed consensual decision to be obsoleted. And I think like you can have an example people love to give is like drugs and curing diseases. And like the way drugs are approved in the United States is you get a monopoly patent for 20 years if you develop the drug and take it through the FDA approval process. And so there's a bunch of research showing you can use AI to make the approval process like 30 to 50% faster and like 40% cheaper, just with like today's systems for like matching patients based on eligibility criteria and like all these things that AI is like quite good at. But if you keep the current system, you're still going to have a monopoly patent period where the pharmaceutical company will have the same incentive to basically charge as much as they can get away with in that time. Maybe you get to that faster. So you get drugs sooner and then like they come out of patent sooner, but it's still with like this 20-year delay. And then they're not picking things based on social utility, but on profitability. And so to take advantage of the benefits of using AI to speed up the clinical trial process and to discover drugs themselves and get the drugs we want, moving to something like a prize system, which has been supported by Nobel economist Joseph Stiglitz and proposed by Bernie Sanders, like where you just have the government, pick drugs that would be good to have and then award a certain amount of money to companies that produce them and then make the patent, anyone can produce it at cost. So you have like generic prices for new drugs that solve problems that we actually want solved. And then all of the efficiency of AI in developing the drugs can be like passed along to the consumer or the government or whatever, rather than being captured largely by the pharmaceutical companies. And so I think the boosters are often just like not looking at the institutions that stand between them and the magical technologies they want and thinking through these political economy questions that will still exist in the world where AI is automating large swaths of human work. And like, if you get into the really, wild, like, okay, AI is fully automating every part of like knowledge work and physical work, like, yeah, then things get really crazy. But there will still be an FDA and it will still take a long time to do these things. And so, yeah, like thinking through like, what are the things that we want as a society? And then how do we use AI when it's appropriate to pursue it? And how do we use other institutional design to get there as well? And the last point I would make is like, when you do need scale, having public compute infrastructure is an important thing that we don't have right now. In the United States, there's basically no public available, computers for doing AI research. In the EU, they're investing a good amount of money into this, and then they can serve it to nonprofits and academics, like at cost or discounted rates. Right now, the government has to ask like Microsoft and Google if they can pretty please have some compute. And so like that's the type of thing where if you are bitter lesson pilled and you want to use scale to do things that are not our obsolescence, then like it's really expensive and you're paying these oligopolies to do it.
There was a proposal that I'm thinking of that I can't remember the name of exactly, which is for essentially sort of a massively multiplayer prompting architecture that allows you to basically do cybersyn, right? The kind of the classic project in Chile, going back to the kind of the early cyberneticists, where you would be able to sort of run the economy in a socialist way, like using the inputs of everyone from the base right into the kind of the full totality. And of course, we're talking about computer systems that were like way slower than current computer systems. But there are other kinds of large social design questions that can be addressed once I think you get out of this idea that AI consists entirely of an individual relationship with a single chatbot.
Yeah.
That is essentially a kind of like a digital servant for you.
Yeah.
So the technology underlying this, deep learning, as you're saying, amazing.
Yeah.
But I think we have to reconsider what it actually means to engage with it, right, in a less individualized way and in a way that can be put towards social use.
Yeah.
So I think it's actually quite an inspiring vision.
Totally. No, like we
we
need to
don't
like expand our
normally do inspiring
imagination.
visions.
Yeah. No, we're kind of forced to expand our imagination by this technology. And, people like Dario Amodei, who's the CEO of Anthropic, kind of says stuff like, it's really simple. Like the way to build these powerful AI models is like stupid simple. You just scale up everything. And he was bitter lesson pilled long before almost anyone else, and like believed in scaling being the way forward. And so if you don't want to give the industry credit, you could just be like, look, they were in the right place at the right time. Jeffrey Hinton and others, Joshua Bengio, like did incredible foundational work on deep learning in like the 80s and 90s and sustained it. And then that is like the golden goose that allows everything else. And these companies just happen to be the ones that were around when graphics cards got good enough, when we got enough data from the internet to just feed them into the models and then produce something that you can scale up indefinitely, at least as up till now. And so, yeah, we can just point that at better stuff than what they're pointing it at.
Garrison Lovely, thank you for doing your research.
Yeah, thank you. This is super fun.